Deep divers establish that decompression protocols based on the gas mixtures they use and the dives they have planned. For a long time, they used the VPM bubble model, but even with the addition of a safety factor, the risk of decompression sickness quickly became unacceptable. The technical diving community then turned to an algorithm using the set of parameters made public by Albert Buhlmann and based on 16 compartments. In 2004, a new generation of dive computers was developed and marketed to meet the needs of these deep divers. Two brands dominated this niche for nearly 10 years. They designed an algorithm using the Haldane formula and the ZHL16 parameter set to continuously calculate the inert gas pressure, either nitrogen or helium, in each compartment. More generalist manufacturers soon took an interest in this narrow market. They were soon joined by a sports watch manufacturer. The competition was fierce. Developing sales towards recreational divers was an objective for some and a necessity for others. The algorithm used in the models sold by these brands was not designed to handle decompression for a second dive. Trimix divers usually limit themselves to a single dive per day. In the event of a second dive, they are experienced enough to establish a suitable protocol. This is not necessarily the case for recreational divers.
Houston, we have a problem.
All these computers using the ZHL16 algorithm only take into account the remaining nitrogen in the different compartments at the end of the surface interval to calculate decompression for a second dive. They apply no further adjustments to account for the particular risk of repetitive dives. Does this sound familiar? Just like with the SOS decompression meter or the Hedge dive computer, the break from the past is brutal and is not justified by even a brief study. The manufacturers involved don't even try to demonstrate the validity of their method. They simply claim to use Buhlmann's algorithm as originally designed in a pure and faithful version. Perhaps the precautions taken by John Scott Haldane or most of the world's navies, the DSAT, or even Albert Buhlmann himself are completely useless. If not, the consequences could be severe. Let's return to our example of two 30-minute dives at a depth of 30 meters separated by a surface interval of an hour and a half. Let's see what Albert Buhlmann proposes in the tables bearing his name. These tables use the ZHL16B parameter set, tested and validated solely for decompression table calculations. For continuous calculation, Buhlmann published the ZHL16C parameter set by modifying the parameters of 10 compartments to make this version suitable for use in a dive computer. Designing a computer using ZHL16B is therefore absurd. A dive computer using ZHL16C should logically be more conservative than the original tables. But is that really the case for repeated dives? Most ZHL16 computers calculate shorter decompression times when set to low conservatism, or longer decompression times with deep stop when set to high conservatism right from the first dive. The comment from one of these manufacturers speaks for itself. Properly trained and instructed divers can adjust the conservatism of the algorithm for repetitive dives. Who would have the idea of investing in a dive computer and then being forced to modify the algorithm's parameters based on the profile of the first dive and the time spent at the surface? Of course, the first dive of 30 minutes at 30 meters creates a fairly high level of saturation. Obviously, a 90-minute surface interval is relatively short, but believing that the problem will disappear with less saturating dives or with a longer surface interval would be a big mistake. The calculation method remains the same. The risk would likely be lower, but still present. In some cases, the danger could even be higher. Let's take another example with a protocol created by Billman himself to test the behavior of a dive computer during repetitive and intensive dives. The first dive at 30 meters for 16 minutes requires no mandatory stops. After 75 minutes at the surface, let's see how a pure algorithm reacts. A second dive at the same depth is again allowed, still without mandatory decompression after the same bottom time. In reality, with this so-called pure version, this dive profile could be repeated 6 times with the same 75-minute surface interval without averting any mandatory stop. We saw that phase 2 of the tests conducted during the valuable DSAT study, originally planned for 6 dives, had to be abandoned for a protocol involving only 4 dives. The DSAT study demonstrated that it was possible to carry out 1, 2, and even 3 repetitive dives without mandatory stops by increasing the times of these dives based on the saturation level of the 60-minute compartment. All modern dive computers account for residual nitrogen at the end of the surface interval, but computers that use the pure ZHL16 algorithm do not apply any adjustments for the second dive, nor the third, nor the fourth. How can such a situation exist?
Easy peasy lemon squeezy.
Either the manufacturers involved don't understand what they are doing, or they understand perfectly, but they know that it will be very difficult to claim that their algorithm is responsible for any decompression sickness. Most of these manufacturers fill their manuals and brochures with sometimes surprising warnings, clearly aiming to absolve themselves of any responsibility. The only possible recommendation is the one Carl Edmonds made during the time of the SOS decompression meters and the Edge dive computer. These computers should not be used for repetitive dives, unless you are willing to test the concept yourself.